Hey everybody, this is Paul with United Real Estate Home Connections. I am a licensed real estate agent in the states of Ohio and Kentucky. I'm also a licensed attorney in the states of Ohio and Michigan. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the appraisal gap clause and the appraisal gap and what it is. So with these videos, I'm going to be trying something a little different. I'm going to try what I call the 5-Minute Fridays. Basically a video 5 minutes long, just explaining a topic useful for real estate buyers, sellers, whether you're owner-occupied or investors. So like I mentioned in this video, I'm talking about the appraisal gap and the appraisal gap coverage clause. So when a buyer, whether they're buying, for owner-occupied or for investment, and they're using a mortgage, in most cases, the lender is going to require an appraisal. And with the appraisal, the appraiser will go out to the property. They will evaluate the property, look at the condition. They will also look at comps, recent sales, recent expireds, other similar properties in and around that area that, have similar features to get an idea of value. Now, in the case where the value meets the purchase price, so you've got a contract that was, an offer that was made by the buyer, the seller accepted, it was based on a certain price. Assuming the appraisal is at that contract price or above, there is no issue. Everything, assuming the buyer and the seller are fine with everything else, they'll close on the day they're supposed to close. Now, if the appraisal price comes in below the contract value, so for example, let's say the house was worth $300,000 and the appraised value comes in at $275,000. So there's an issue there. Bank will not lend on that property with the appraisal at $275,000 when the purchase price is at $300,000, absent some other action. So what are the other actions? The seller could reduce their price. They could say, okay, we'll sell to the buyer for $275,000. Everything's fine. Buyer obviously should be happy with that. The lender will be fine with that. They can go and close. The buyer can bring more cash to the table. So in that case, the buyer has to increase their down payment. They need to make sure that their loan to value covers, the actual value of the house versus, the contract price of the house. So they'll be bringing more money. Might not be worth it to them. Depends on the situation, depends on the type of market. In this kind of market that we have today, we're shifting. It's a lot of the buyers are stepping out, and higher interest rates don't help. So they need to make sure their dollar is working for them. So there could be an in between as well too. The seller can agree to come down a little bit, and the buyer can agree to bring up a little more. Now, in most real estate contracts, there's a lot of clauses in there. Your appraisal clause, your inspection clause, your financing clause. Basically, they protect the buyer. The seller doesn't have as much protection in a purchase contract in most situations. This does vary state by state. But there is the appraisal gap coverage clause. So that appraisal gap, where the house, an example I mentioned, $300,000, the value is actually $275,000 based on an appraiser. Well, there's a difference there. With the appraisal gap coverage clause, that's basically language put into the contract that says the buyer agrees to cover that gap. So there's that $25,000 gap in there between that $300,000, that $275,000. So in that case, with that clause in there, that actually protects the seller. That clause says to the seller, okay, if it's appraised for less, I'm going to make up the difference so that we can close. And that, then the lender is fine with that. The buyer and the seller are fine with that. So they agreed to those terms up front. They should understand. If you have any questions, talk to your attorney, talk to your agent first, and then as well talk to an attorney, because the attorney understands the legality of those contracts versus the agent. They understand it. A lot of those contracts are form contracts. So in most cases, agents cannot change the language in those contracts. They can fill in the blanks, but as an attorney, I can amend those contracts. I can say, okay, let's add that in here and explain to the buyer, explain to the seller, whoever the client is, this is how it works, this is how it'll help you, or this is how it might work against you. So that's what the appraisal gap coverage clause is, and that's also what the appraisal gap is. I did recently have an article published on my website about that. I will put that in the link below. If you do have any questions, please let me know. Feel free to drop them in the comments below. And if you could like and subscribe to my channel, I would appreciate it. Thank you again.